Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
All right, gentlemen, how's it going? This is your main man, Scott McKay, coming at you again with another episode of the Mountaintop Podcast from X and Y Communications. You know, some topics are fun. Some of them are light and playful. It's fun to talk about sexy women, but it's not always easy to talk about sex with women, let alone sexually transmitted infections. You know, it used to be STDs, it used to be VD, man, back in the gory old days, venereal diseases. You know, dictionary didn't even know what venereal means. Sexually transmitted diseases became sexually transmitted infections, STIs. And I tell you what, you could be a master with women. You can know your way around asking them out, always have the perfect thing to say, be charming on dates, sexually attractive, have your masculinity going. But if you want to talk about STIs with women, that's like where like the needle on the record scratches, you know, and the whole conversation stops. And unfortunately, a lot of us as guys puss out. We just go, all right, well, you know, I hope she's not infected. I don't think I'm infected. So maybe we'll just not talk about it and everything will be okay. Well, you can't do that. That's not being a big four man. That's not being responsible. It's not being ethical. With me today is a man who's got his own story to tell, a story which led to the founding of his company that he is the CEO of and obviously the founder of, called Shameless Care. Shameless Care is a sexual health telemedicine company focused on STI testing and medications. He is also the host of the Sex is Good podcast, and he runs a growing YouTube channel from the Chicagoland area in Illinois, none other than Robert Johnson. Robert, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you so much, Scott. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I don't know if the guys are going to be excited to listen to this, but if they know what's good for them, they'll stick around for it because we're about to drop some good knowledge. And you know what? I hate to break it to you guys, but this might be a lot of fun because I'm going to make it fun. Robert's got to talk about what he talks about, be a little straight-laced about it because, you know, the lawyers are watching. But, you know, he's got a good sense of humor, so prepare to be surprised on his side as well. But we're going to make this fun. I'm on a mission. I'm going to make this fun. And enough about me. Robert, tell these guys your story, which isn't necessarily fun, but it needs to be told. What caused you to get a vision for creating Shameless Care to begin with?
Well, I tell you what, Scott, I think your listeners are going to feel better about sex and about STIs when we're done here today. And that's probably never been the case for them anytime they were in sexual education class in junior high or high school. They probably got scared to bits. So we're going to talk a little bit differently about it today. Does that sound fair?
Yeah. You know what? You bring up a great point right off the jump there. All of us, especially those of us who are of a certain age, were taken to health class, usually supplanted gym class for a couple weeks there. And the girls were basically told, here's a penis. Don't touch it. Right. And the boys were basically told, here are girls. Respect them, treat them like your sister, sit down and shut up. And oh, by the way, if you do touch them, A, they're going to get pregnant basically if you make out with them. And B, you're going to get an incredibly awful infection that'll make your penis rot and fall off. So, you know what? Do yourself and, you know, as we do your parents a service and just don't do this. Abstinence. Okay. And man, it was incredibly fear-based. Okay. It was driven by shame and guilt, especially if you went to a parochial school. Or, you know, I remember going to Christian youth group meetings and we're going to talk about sex this week at youth group. And the kids were all like, yeah. But then it was such a downer. You know, it was like exactly as I described, redux. Yeah. So you bring up a good point there where our whole conversation about this topic probably started off on the wrong foot at too tender an age to begin with anyway, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, but you have to keep in mind, Scott, that people like to use simplistic language. Smoking kills, seatbelt saves lives, condoms are protection, and you're kind of forced to use simplistic messages like that when you're speaking to the masses, which you are, de facto when you're teaching in public education or something like that. But for the people listening to this show, I think they deserve a little bit more of an in-depth and sex positive conversation, which is exactly what we're going to have today.
Darn Skippy, man. So tell us your story.
All right. Well, about 5 or 6 years ago, I was living my life and getting STI tested every 6 months. I felt like that was the right thing to do. There was never anything wrong with me. I never felt like there was anything going on. I just knew that you were supposed to do that. So I, I did it, of course. And I had just gotten an STI test maybe a couple weeks previously. And then a partner texted me and she told me that I had given her gonorrhea. And I was really surprised by that for two reasons. One of which was I felt absolutely fine. And the other one was I'm looking, as she's texting me, I'm looking on my phone at my negative test results, which showed that I was negative for gonorrhea. So I sent her the test results and she said, well, have you ever been throat swab tested? And I thought, what the hell is that? I had never even heard of that before. But I, obviously looked it up at that point, Scott, and sure enough, gonorrhea and chlamydia are site-specific bacterial infections. You can have them in your mouth or your throat. You can have them in your genitals, which is what most people are familiar with. You can also have them in your anus, including people who have never had anal sex. I'll spare you the details on that. But basically, it can be in one of those three locations, and a STI test should really test you for all three. So as soon as I figured that out, I thought, oh my God. So I go to doctor number one, Scott, who had no idea what the hell I was talking about. He knew less about it than I did at that point. Wouldn't do it, didn't know how to do it. Went to doctor number two. He ordered the throat swab. I then go down to the lab in the basement of this medical office where a phlebotomist, who was not a young woman, Scott, I'm assuming this was not her first day on the job. She didn't know what it was and wouldn't do the throat swab test. I finally went to the third doctor who did the throat swab test, and sure enough, I had a completely asymptomatic case of oral gonorrhea, which, I want to reassure everybody is really not a big deal. I mean, these are bacterial infections that spread from human to human, not unlike strep throat or something like that. Causes no permanent damage in most cases if you get it treated, and I did. And in this case, I didn't even know I had it. It's not like it was making me terribly sick. But the point is, it was just such an epiphany for me, Scott, where I thought, we're constantly telling people to get tested, but if they're not being tested for the things they're most likely to have, and I dare say that most people have unprotected oral sex, then what are we doing? That's just so ridiculous. And I just couldn't get it out of my head, so I created Shameless Care to help to address that problem.
Yeah, I've never really been able to wrap my head around protected oral sex. I mean, you could argue I've been able to bury my face in it, but wrap my head around it, I don't know. I just don't know how you would do that. I've heard of like oral dams and things like that, but I wouldn't even know where to buy such a thing. Your drugstore isn't going to carry it. And I mean, oral sex, people don't use condoms. People don't use protection. You can get
exactly,
herpes.
Scott. People in public health like to talk about what people should do. I think the better conversation is to work with what people actually do so we can actually, help people. You can lecture people all day about using dental dams before you go down on a woman, but I can pretty well assure you that very few people listening to me right now have actually done that or are going to. And I'm not saying if they should or shouldn't. I'm just dealing with the reality of the situation, which is why thorough STI testing is so critically important. If you're going to bother to get STI tested, you should get tested pretty thoroughly so you know what exactly is going on.
Yeah, that oral dental dam thing is like saying, hey, let's go play soccer and then building this fence in the middle of the field. It's like, how are we supposed to play soccer on this thing? You know what I mean? It just doesn't make any sense. I don't think there's any way around it. And it's one of those things. I mean, people are going to have oral sex, right? I would say people have oral sex even when they're not ready for genital sex. It may be even more prevalent. And just taking a shower or cleaning up isn't necessarily going to clean this up. So, that's something that I think is a great place perhaps to take this conversation next. And first of all, before we do that, thank you for your vulnerability on that to talk about it, because in doing so, what you've done is made all of us as guys feel like normal guys if we struggle with this. It's been estimated the number of people who actually have some strain of something, especially one of the many, many strains of HPV, which colloquially was known as genital warts. If you're sexually active, it's like somewhere near 100% that you're infected with something. So, first of all, what needs to be on the table is you're not damaged goods if this has happened. Even if you've got herpes nowadays, or dare I say even HIV, these can be medically controlled, right? And so it doesn't make sense to lose your whole self-esteem over this, and it also doesn't make any sense to run scared from it, like I said, to puss out from either getting tested or from having the conversation with a woman. So help these guys get in the psychological frame of mind here to first of all realize that this is something we should be paying attention to, and it's something that's really just part of life, not something that's driven by shame or
Yeah,
shouldn't be
absolutely,
driven
Scott. I
by
mean, it
shame.
really is just a part of life at this point. Going back to HPV, that's been called the common cold of the sexual health world or the glitter of the sexual health world. I mean, just imagine if you opened up a jar of glitter at home and it goes everywhere and you really can't contain it, and everybody's going to get infected with it at some point or touched by that. The statistics on HPV, you nailed them exactly, Scott. I mean, the CDC basically says there's virtually nothing you can do to protect yourself from HPV. I mean, condoms do help, but this is an infection that also spreads from skin to skin contact. So just being intimate with someone, there's a really high risk that you're going to become infected. And of course, oral sex, which we talked about earlier. And so that HPV vaccine is really key. Anybody listening to me right now that's probably under 30 was vaccinated as a child or, a teenager for that. But anybody that's older than that, Scott, I would really encourage them to, as soon as this podcast is over, contact some sort of medical provider about becoming vaccinated for that, because that is something where HIV for most people is now manageable. HPV, you're much more likely to contract it, number one. And number two, it is still killing people every single day in terms of cervical cancer for women and oropharyngeal squamous cell carcinoma of the throat in men, penile cancer, anal cancer, things like that. And we have this gift from the science gods of the HPV vaccine, which has been a miracle. I could go on and on about the statistics, but for someone to be sexually active in 2026 and not protected by that vaccine would be a shame. It's readily available. It's here for us. It's something that previous generations could have only dreamed about. And so I would just really encourage them, to do that. But as far as taking ownership, Scott, I think that is so key. And that's my story. And my story isn't nearly as important as the story of the people that are listening to me right now. But people do make fun of me for becoming infected with this and telling the story. But the truth is, when I realized this public health deficiency, which was we're telling people to get tested, but we're not testing them properly, that wasn't something that I could live with. And so you sometimes have to stick your nose out there and become the butt of jokes to a certain extent. But if you're helping people, so what? Who cares? Do it. And the simple truth is that people have sex and people become infected with these infections, and we have to test them properly. And I do think, Scott, too, that when you talk about ownership and having those conversations with women, it's absolutely key. And I'll tell you one thing that I do know about women is that women respect someone with confidence, and someone who's willing to have this conversation in a real mature way is automatically going to seem more manly, if you will, than someone who's just afraid to have this conversation at all, or has taken so little ownership of the topic in their life that they don't know enough about it to have a conversation.
I think that's an excellent point. Very well taken. Before we go there, I want to backtrack a few minutes where you were talking about HPV, because you said some very FUD-inducing things that sound like, your dick's going to fall off. First of all, there are dozens of strains of HPV, each carrying different symptoms and ramifications, many of them being asymptomatic for most everyone. I don't know the exact number. It's very few of them that lead to cervical cancer in women, which is dire. And a couple of them have more dire potential ramifications for men as well, as you mentioned. But that is still very rare. The ones that carry cervical cancer in women, sadly, are pretty common.
Mm.
So if you're a carrier of that and you go around spreading your seed with women, that's irresponsible and unethical. Okay. But it used to be called genital warts, and actually only a few, relatively speaking, strains of HPV even cause the genital warts. And what people don't realize about genital warts is those can go into remission. You can actually, they can hide and never come back. So even that is not a permanent situation where you become damaged goods. So I just want to underscore all that because, you threw a lot of very scary things out there. I think it deserved a little bit of elaboration. But going back to what you talked about more recently here, with women really admiring confidence, the only thing that would keep you from having an STI conversation with the woman you're potentially going to be intimate with is that you lack the confidence that she's still going to want to be intimate with you after you bring up such a messy subject. That's the elephant in the room here. It's like if we talk about sex, then I can't get her in the mood and get her to lose herself in the music the moment when it happens and just go for it because I don't really care if she regrets that decision later. Men who are confident expect that women want to have sex with them. And men who are confident also, I mean, that's one pillar of what I call the big four. The other is liking women. Having character counts here. And also making women feel safe and secure is a pillar of masculinity that turns women on. The irony is that when you sense that you're going to be intimate with a woman and you say, hey, let's have this conversation now before we get into the heat of the moment, the crazy thing from a male perspective about how women's minds are wired is that could actually be more of a turn on for her than skipping the conversation. Weirdly. I mean, that's going to be something guys are going to be like, yeah, I don't know. Can you shed some light on that? Do you agree?
I completely agree, Scott. I think you hit on all four pillars there when you talk about STI testing. Lack of confidence is going to be one reason not to have it. It takes some courage just to bring up the subject. But the other one is a lack of knowledge, and that's what hopefully we can help gentlemen with today. When I've had this conversation with women, the conversation normally goes something like this. I share with her my STI test results, and then I say, have you been STI tested? And they always have been. The women that I talk with and communicate with, this is something that they do. Women who are sexually active, generally speaking, are kind of on top of this in one way or the other. And then I ask them what they were tested for, and they'll say, a full panel. It's always that phrase, full panel. And then I'll say, what does that mean? Not sarcastically like it might be coming across on the air right now, but basically I'm just trying to figure out what they mean by a full panel. And they'll say, oh, everything. And I'll say, did you get a throat swab test? And they'll go, what? No, I don't know what that is. And so it's like one of those things where unfortunately the conversation has to go beyond, have you been STI tested? Because what your listeners need to know is that the phrase full panel or test me for everything, you can go to the doctor, Scott, and say, give me a full STI panel, and you will get some tests run. The unfortunate thing is you go to the doctor down the street and ask the same question, you're going to get 10 slightly different tests done than what you got at doctor number one. So the devil is in the details when it comes to STI testing. And I just think that the more people know about it, A, the better they're going to feel about sex. They're going to feel safer. They're going to feel more confident. And B, they're going to be able to have that conversation with women. I equate it to this. Those of us that are old enough that we've had a vasectomy or our wives have had a hysterectomy or something, but basically making babies is no longer in the equation when it comes to sex. And that anxiety is relieved from that when sex no longer comes with the risk of an unintended pregnancy. Sex is so much better. It just is. It's one less thing to worry about. And I kind of feel the same way about STIs, that the more people know about STIs and the more they can have that conversation, you just kind of take that anxiety and put it to bed, so to speak, pardon the pun, but it just makes everything more fun.
I agree. Anytime you take stress and anxiety out of a sexual situation, the more you can relax. And frankly, the better you're going to perform sexually. We were talking before we started recording this about how when guys find themselves in a situation with a new woman and they have the failure to perform problem, it's usually all right in their head because they're scared they're going to look bad or she's going to laugh or they're not going to be good enough. And it's always, as Yogi Berra once said, 90% of this game is half mental.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So when we have the conversation with women about STIs, obviously it should be before we're ripping each other's clothes off passionately. How would you detect the right time to have an STI conversation with a woman? Because I think that is going to be the big time question for a lot of guys to have answered here. When do you know, as a guy who's reading the room, and I talk about reading the room as a really invaluable skill when relating to anybody really, but especially women as a man, what does a good room reader look for to know it's time to have this conversation?
That is such a great question, Scott, because everybody in the world is going to think they know the answer to this, but there really is no perfect answer. So let's say, for example, that someone has a type of oral herpes. They get cold sores occasionally. And for your listeners that don't know, that is a type of herpes. It's often HSV type 1, not always, but often. But it's a communicable type of herpes that can be spread either to the other person's mouth or to their genitals. And so the question then becomes, Scott, and your question is so brilliant. Imagine you're at a bar or a speed dating event or something like that, and you meet a woman and the sparks are flying, and you're having a great conversation. To me, the kind of typical, and Scott, I'm curious to know what you think about this, but to me, the typical kind of routine or dance that you might have is like a great conversation, some light touching, eventually maybe some kissing, and then maybe the conversation starts to turn towards, okay, what are we doing the rest of this evening, sort of thing. Well, by that point, you've already kissed the person. So if you have HSV1, you've already crossed the threshold of something that you could potentially pass at that point. Yet you also can't be so presumptuous that you meet a woman and you share a couple laughs, and next thing you know, you're trying to break out the conversation about sexually transmitted infections. So it is just a tough subject of which there is no perfect answer to, quite frankly. I think that just like the conversation is eventually going to have to transition to sex, if someone is planning on trying to hook up with this person, then the conversation is ultimately going to have to talk about STIs as well. And when the conversation about STIs come, it's just so critically important, Scott, that we're not doing this thing I see young people do online this day, which is like, well, what's your body count? And trying to figure out if this person could have an infection or not based upon some number, when they're posed with that ridiculous kind of red pill question, that we have a more thoughtful conversation about, are you under medical care? What are you getting STI screened? Things like that. And I think it's also important, Scott, quite frankly, for people to think about what they're willing to roll the dice with. I talked about throat swabs earlier. The odds of a woman that you're talking to getting STI tested, very high. The odds of her getting a throat swab test during her last STI test, not very high at all. Does that mean that she could spread gonorrhea or chlamydia to you through her mouth? Absolutely. Is that going to kill you? No. And these are things that you need to think about and what you're willing to live with and what you're not, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, going along with what you're saying, which is all brilliant, I think there are two things that are important to talk about here. First of all, we do not live risk-free lives. Every time we get in a car and go and run errands or go on any kind of trip, we could get into a car crash and get seriously injured or killed. But we still get in the car and we go. We live our lives. Life is inherently dangerous. None of us get out of it alive. So if you're going to suddenly develop some sort of weird phobia of touching a female human being because you might catch something, then you probably should avoid going to the grocery store because you might come home with the cold or the flu from someone who breathed on you. I mean, we all lived through COVID and we all got bored of that and started rolling our eyes at the risks associated with that and learned a hard lesson over the course of 2 hard-fought years or even more that we really would rather go out and live our lives rather than live in a bubble risk-free. Now, some people thought that was freaking great and still haven't recovered and are still happy to be antisocial and have DoorDash come every day. But that's a different conversation for a different day and a different guest. You got to go out and meet women and talk to them and interact with them. And I understand, I have red-pilled friends who are listening who are going to go, well, the AI porn nowadays is much better and I can't get, cooties from that. Okay, fine, but you're still going to be missing out on a whole lot by not interacting with real life women. It's like you can watch people do adventures on TV and go, wow, that looks really cool, but you're never going to feel the adrenaline of having done that adventure unless you go take the risk. And yes, I think sex is supposed to be a wonderful adventure, and usually you do get out of it alive, okay? The other thing that I think needs to be said here, because it's something that never gets talked about, is men generally do not have sexuality demystified for them at a very young age like women do. A lot of boys, because the prolonging of adolescence or whatever, unless you were one of the popular kids in junior high or high school and your brother, or dare I say your really well-informed dad, showed you the ropes and taught you how not to fear women and how to relate to them, you probably spent a lot more time fantasizing about naked girls and what you were going to do with them when you finally got them naked than actually spending any time at all naked with girls in your teenage years. And what that does is it creates a too good to be true factor where, oh my goodness, if I could ever actually see boobies in real life, it would be a miracle. Meanwhile, women, if they're reasonably attractive at all, have some boy somewhere throwing themselves at them, offering sex cheaply from a young age. So the idea of being able to have sex is cheap as dirt for women from a very young age. So women don't have this pie in the sky, too good to be true vision of sexuality really ever. Now, a lot of guys get angry at that. Yeah, women can have sex with whoever they want, whenever they want. And we guys have to suffer. Well, yeah. Well, first of all, it takes two to tango. Second of all, women just don't look at sexuality like that. Women aren't about, oh, cool, I can have sex with whoever I want. Let's go be a slut. Because A, they get slut shamed progressively less in today's society, but still more so than men do. And second of all, I think women are looking for a guy who would respect them for more than just the sexuality they offer anyway, because they don't want cheapened sex. They still want it to have a more human element. What I do for a comparo for men is like, imagine if you had several $1 million and women just wanted your money. I mean, would you just give them the money? It's like, oh, hell no. But if a woman comes and treats you with respect and laughs at your jokes and likes you for who you are, then, you'll probably buy her a new Ford Mustang or something, But whatever happens and whatever the social ramifications onto adulthood are, one of them is definitely the vast majority of women who are attractive enough for us to want to have sex with to begin with have been talking about sex for their entire lives from pubescence onward. It's no big deal for women to talk about sex matter-of-factly as a general topic. Women can happily talk about sex with you without getting around to talking about sex with you, if you know what I mean. So the irony there is if a woman is willing to talk about sex with you, she's probably willing to have sex with you, but that's a matter of reading the room. Women avoid sex with guys they find unattractive or creepy. They won't even talk matter-of-factly about it. But women will be surprisingly open to just having a matter-of-fact conversation about, where they are with sex and how they feel about it and have they been tested long before the clothes come off. I agree with you that if you have gotten to the point where you both obviously clearly know there's mutual attraction. Maybe you've kissed, maybe you're just flirting so heavy that it's obvious this is going to go somewhere. I think it's a sign of confidence and something that women will appreciate from a perspective of the man's masculinity reaching out to her femininity to make sure she feels safe and comfortable, to ask her how she feels about sex in general and the timing of it and how she feels about it and if she's been tested matter-of-factly. And I think if most guys give this a shot, assuming a sane woman who's attracted to you and isn't broken, right? I think guys will be flummoxed by how simple and easy it is to have this conversation and how much women go, thank you for that. And I think that's the answer to this question. And I don't think it's ever talked about because I think a lot of people really struggle with the answer. It's like, oh God, when do I talk to her about STIs? I don't want to chase her away. But I don't think you will chase her away if there's that mutual attraction and you're confident enough to bring it up. I think she'll thank you for it.
Yeah, if you think about all the things that women have to be afraid of when it comes to sex, Scott, other than just being outright assaulted, there's stealthing where men remove condoms during the middle of sex, all sorts of things. I'll spare your listeners the details of that.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely not a woman. I'm not pretending to be one on a podcast here, but I would assume that a man who has the confidence to actually talk to her about STIs is not going to seem like the guy that's going to do those things. Is that really the guy that's going to stealth her later?
He's trying to protect her.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And so I just, it also reminds me, Scott, of explicit verbal consent, which is this idea, and your listeners are probably familiar, but it's this idea of asking someone before you touch them and then asking again as things escalate. And so many men think that women aren't going to respect that. But I got to tell you that it takes a lot of confidence to say something like, may I kiss you? And then as things are escalating, like, God, you're so hot. I would love to kiss you right now. Would you be okay with that? Like that takes more confidence than just, well, let me do 6 shots and then just go for it. Like everybody could read the room and know that guy's not as confident as he's coming across. And I think for men to actually have this conversation about STIs is a similar thing. I think women respond very positively to it, at least in my experience.
Well, it's a sign that, first of all, you have nothing to hide for your own part. Why would you bring up a potential objection out of the blue like that if you had a raging case of herpes going on? You would probably try to sweep it under the carpet instead of throwing it out on the table. It's kind of like when I first started telling women I wanted sane women. Women will always say, what are you looking for on dates, right? Well, it's not like, how are you doing? It's not a pleasantry. They really want an answer. And most guys think it's a trick question, but really, women are just curious to know what you're looking for. And I got into the habit after a bad first marriage that ended because of severe mental illness. I finally got over myself and just started telling women on first dates when they ask that question, I want a sane woman who's not under the care of a psychiatrist. And I was bracing myself to be yelled at and how dare you? And I don't even know why I was fearing negative recourse from that conversation in retrospect. But I had women do the exact opposite. I'm so glad you brought that up because it proves to me you're probably not a psycho head case yourself. Thank you for bringing that up. No, I am actually a very level-headed woman, and I want the same thing from a guy.
Huh.
We would probably be voraciously making out 10 minutes later. It was magical to be upfront about being sane. So if you're going to be upfront about, hey, I don't want us to have sexually transmitted diseases, if she has a problem with it and gets all defensive, keeping it a buck, dude, I think you might have just dodged a bullet if she's going to be like that about it. If she's got nothing to hide, she'll be glad you brought it up. She's not going to run away and go, oh my God, you were supposed to be a Disney prince this whole time. That's so unromantic. I'm going to go find a guy who's much more romantic than you and, kick you to the curb. Guys fear rejection so hard at every stage when really this is something that's going to create that acceptance. I agree. Now, I hear you, and you're coming from the perspective of enthusiastic consent, which is the word I've heard another guest of ours, Mike Domish, use, who goes and talks to college classes about this. Enthusiastic consent, I think there were creative and more romantic ways to get consent from a woman than going, stop. May I kiss you? Sign here on the dotted line. I think, that's a little rote. I think you can go, you're getting me into so much trouble right now. If you don't stop doing those cute things every time I talk to you, I'm just going to have to kiss you. And she'll go, you mean like this when I bite my lip? Then you better kiss her. That was a yes. You got to read the room, right? But yes, I think it's very good to talk about what you would like to do, not only scientifically and medically like we're talking about, but you can talk about it romantically. I would love to watch you have multiple orgasms and see if she runs away or says, when can we start? And then during the whole course of the process, talking about it, there's nothing wrong with talking during sex, laughing during sex. I think you've been watching the wrong porn if you think that's prohibited. I would argue the better porn is the more realistic porn anyway. But that's a different conversation for a different guest, probably a female guest. We have plenty of those. But I think you're absolutely just spouting a fountainhead of absolutely wonderful information for these guys. The central theme seems to be, guys, you got to get over yourself here. This is a conversation you need to have, and women are ready to have it. It seems to be our problem, not theirs. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just a little bit of knowledge will make you prepared to have that conversation and make sex better. Scott, if I may give you an example, I graduated high school in 1998. And so when I was in high school, and particularly in junior high, the HIV/AIDS crisis was still well underway. And for some people, it still is. But, we were taught, and because it was true at the time, Scott, that if you have sex, you are at risk of this virus, which will kill you in about a year or so. And it's not going to be very pleasant. That was the lesson that was driven home to me quite well and permanently. And then Magic Johnson, a lot of us remember when he was diagnosed and so on and so forth.
Who importantly is still here, alive and well.
Yeah, absolutely. Another scientific breakthrough. But I remember in college, I was on the phone with someone who was in my department that I was in. And she just casually mentioned to me that she just loves to perform oral sex on men, just sort of out of the blue. And I'm no rocket scientist, but that came through loud and clear to me. I knew exactly what she was doing, right? And very shortly after that, I was on my way to her dorm room. Even a dense young man like me, I understood what was going on here and what she was telling me. And we ended up having sex that night. And then I'm, a little ashamed to admit this, but I spent the next several weeks just living in this anxiety spiral. I was convinced that I had contracted HIV. I even went so far as I donated blood because I didn't know how else to get tested. And I thought to myself, well, somebody told me, if you donate blood and you have HIV, they'll call you and they'll tell you. So that was like me being so stupid and young at the time. That was the best thing I could come up with.
I was phobic. I was phobic about HIV.
Yeah, I think everybody was. But today we know that the per exposure risk, so let's say, Scott, that she did have untreated HIV as a 19-year-old college freshman female, which would be in and of itself extremely unlikely. Let's just pretend for a minute that she did. My risk of contracting it from unprotected penis and vaginal sex is 4 in 10,000. In theory, I could have unprotected sex with HIV positive women the rest of my life, and it still may be improbable that I would contract it. Now, I want everybody to hear me. It can happen the very first time, and sometimes it does happen the very first time. The world is full of people who are infected with HIV from penis and vaginal sex. I'm not saying that that's not true. I'm just saying that had I known that, Scott, had I known that even if by some weird coincidence this young woman has HIV, that my odds of contracting it were 4 in 10,000, I could have just not lived with that anxiety and had a better life. So yeah, 4 out of 10,000, and that's not zero, but it's so much closer to zero than I thought. And I was hyper-focused on HIV, but at the time was the only STI that I really thought of as like a permanent STI. And it's just unfortunate because they ended up scaring the hell out of a young person to try to protect them from HIV, but really putting me at risk of so many other things. And Scott, I'll leave you with this. I just got back. We had a booth at a big swinger convention in New Orleans, of all things. 3,000 people there. All of them are sex positive. A lot of really, if people aren't familiar with that lifestyle, it's a lot of like middle-aged, really successful people. The kids are off to college, whatever. They're living their second life or their third life. Really awesome people. And I can't tell you how many people I talked to who, based upon the type of sex they told me they have, penis and vaginal sex, we always use condoms, etc., their risk of HIV was very, very close to zero. But they weren't being STI tested properly for oral gonorrhea. They weren't HPV vaccinated, et cetera. And that's just kind of getting to my point, which is like we can become hyper-focused on certain things when we don't know a lot about them. And great information is the key that unlocks so many awesome things in our life and helps us take accountability for anything in our life, including sexually transmitted infections.
Well, information is power. And when you give women that information and they feel empowered, they feel safe and comfortable, and you end up perhaps ironically having more sex with them. You were talking about the fear instilled within us in the 80s and 90s. I'm going to just drop this. But the same Dr. Anthony Fauci who presided over virulent diseases during COVID was the one who presided over the AIDS epidemic. So his style of messaging, et cetera, et cetera. Nothing's new there. Okay. We were told by Oprah that HIV would be airborne in 2 years and, it's not a gay disease. So there was a socio-political agenda tied to it. When the internet, the World Wide Web became available and CDC.org came online, and if you were willing to go look for the numbers, you could find the real honest truth about infection rates and who was getting infected. You found out very quickly that intravenous drug users are basically writing themselves a death sentence. Okay. Shared needle was like injecting the virus directly into your system. Men having sex with men, 1 in 30 instances. And then, if you knew where to look, in 1997-98, you could see the CDC had open, actual, real figures saying the number of people who have gotten HIV, contracted HIV from men having sex with women, right? Heterosexual sex, was fewer than would hold a Major League Baseball stadium in North America. And that margin of error fit within the potential number of people who would still be in the closet and lie about how they contracted it. That's a game changer. And that's what you weren't being told. The number of women, lesbian women, if you want to think this is a gay disease and, God strikes down gay people or something like that, if you're on that agenda, women having sex with women, it was almost unheard of to contract HIV. So yes, the truth matters here. When we knew that truth, when we're empowered with the truth, then we can make better sexual decisions. Now, whatever socio-political agenda is out there trying to keep men from having sex with women and making babies and building families, that's well documented on this show, but I think you can throw this pebble on that pile. And if we fear sex, we have less of it, for sure. And what you're talking about is taking the fear away from sex by having this open conversation, saying, hey, look, getting tested, it's a normal human activity. We should all be doing it before we do it. And you're not broken or weird or strange or dirty because you do test it. Now, with that, the mic drop on this show is, gentlemen, even though what you've heard today about women openly going and getting a lot of STI testing, and most women are STI tested and most men hide from it and run from it. Most men just don't like doctors in general, and most women are perfectly okay with going to the doctor. But there's more to it. Women also tend to live in the moment. Once they get good and horny, they'll be like, YOLO. And I have always been shocked. I mean, I've been married for 20 years, but when I was single, I was shocked at the number of women who would forego condoms and not even feel like they need to have the STI conversation if you look clean and healthy. Mm-hmm. And my goodness, what a big lie that is. So guys, if a woman's saying, hey, you don't have to use a condom with me, we Gucci, don't consider that like your golden e-ticket ride, okay? Have the conversation anyway. Be responsible even if she's not being responsible in the moment. I think that's an important footnote here.
Yeah, be the grounded one, be the confident one, the sober one, the level-headed one. Absolutely. And I think women are going to respond positively to that as well. 100% agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I agree. His name is Robert Johnson. He's the founder of Shameless Care, a sexual health telemedicine company. You can do all this with telemedicine consultations, right? And then send the
Absolutely.
tests and do them remotely. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a
fantastic.
team of board-certified physicians across the state. So even if you live in Alaska or Louisiana or Arizona or wherever you're at, we have doctors that are licensed in your states, and we do STI testing and a whole host of medications. People can see them on the website. You can use coupon code MOUNTAIN15 to take $15 off your order. One of the things that's different about us than I think
$15 or
practically anybody
15%?
else. It's $15.
Okay. Yeah, that could be more than 15% depending on what you're doing. Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the things that's different about us than I think practically any other telehealth company, not to toot our own horn, but some of you I think will really like this, is we don't
your
have
own
any
horn. You're the guest.
we don't have any subscriptions. And so I think we've all seen that thing where we look at our bank account and we get really mad because we're like, oh, I meant to cancel that thing that's now on our bank account or our credit card statement. We don't do that. We feel like if people want to send us money, they can just simply reorder. We don't want them to have another subscription to manage. So if you want to try something at shamelesscare.com and it turns out it doesn't scratch your itch, doesn't fix what you thought it might fix, that sort of thing, which it probably will, you don't have to worry about canceling.
Yeah. That itch that's scratching is what we're trying to get rid of by calling you. Now, what you've just implied there, Robert, is if we've been using another, online service to get prescriptions filled for men's sexual health, you might be able to pick up that mantle and do it more honestly and less expensively without the subscription.
Yes, we're generally about 40% less expensive, but I don't think money is any reason to choose us. I think if people like the sort of frank sexual conversations that we're having in a sex positive way, transparent pricing and no subscriptions, then we're going to be something that you really enjoy doing business with.
Fantastic. And guys, when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com, let's make it shameless. mountaintoppodcast.com/shameless. You will be magically teleported to Shameless Care, and you can see what Robert and his team have going on. Robert, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation, a necessary one. And I think we talked about things that people should be talking about and don't. And I think we were a little bit entertaining, at least while we're getting that job done. So I thank you so much for coming on board. I'd love to have you come back on sometime and talk to us about how men are using Cialis and Viagra and what the boundaries are there, because I think that would be another good conversation. Will you come back and have that conversation with us?
Would love to. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Scott.
Yeah, thank you. Gentlemen, get on my calendar. Let's talk about where you are in your sex life, in your dating life. Get the right women in front of you. You could do that by getting on my calendar at mountaintoppodcast.com. Go ahead and visit Jocko Willink's company, Origin in Maine, the guys at Hero Soap, the guys at the Keyport. Use the coupon code MOUNTAIN10 to get 10% off any of our longtime sponsors. And also, guys, if you haven't picked up that free report called Flip the Switch, 5 things you can do right now to get better with women, that's waiting for you at mountaintoppodcast.com. Won't cost you a dime. Just subscribe to my daily newsletter, which is fluff free. I give you good content every day, and that is there for you, as well as a whole host of other things at mountaintoppodcast.com. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.